It's a big topic. I'm sure they'll have a lot to say, but we'll try to leave time for some questions, for some Q&A. First, Tony Perkins. He's a veteran Marine, former police officer, ordained minister, and a pro-family and pro-life political leader as a former Louisiana state representative. He is the longest-serving president of the Family Research Council, which I'm sure you've heard of. And the other gentleman, I think some of you may have heard of, David Horowitz, founder of the Freedom Center, prolific author, the left's most feared and hated apostate, and a tireless intellectual warrior for conservatives. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them both up to the stage. David, I'm going to start with you, though. You've written a book coming out in February, which Chris Reddy mentioned. It's entitled Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. I want to just set the scene, if I may, with a quote from it. It goes like this: when the First Amendment was adopted in 1791, the principle that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion was plainly understood by every American, including lawmakers and judges. Today, the free exercise of religion has ceased to be a guaranteed right in America. Instead, it has become a battlefield. So, before we examine how we got to this point, in what ways do we see religious freedom under attack today?
Well, it's under attack all over. Let me just give a little background to the book. Chris Ruddy is responsible. He came up with the idea. He said, it might be interesting to have an agnostic Jew, former radical, write about the war against Christians. And I tended to look at it as a pretty much secular person, but with a lot of respect for religious people, as a parochial issue. Religious freedom, okay, there's this one group that's under attack. But the attack goes like this. Those of you who've been to Washington know there's a Capitol Visitors Center that they paid $680-odd million to build. And they systematically expunged all the religious roots of this country from the Visitors Center. And they did Lincoln's desk, but there's no Bible on it. They did, there's an In God We Trust, and they shot it so you can't see In God We Trust. They gave the country a different, I forget the motto, it's really by some obscure anti-religious 19th, you would never know the name of this person. And what I discovered in doing the book is that the essence of this country, the core principles that make us Americans, the idea of pluralism, the idea of equality of all people, is rooted in the Protestant Reformation. 98% of the people who settled this country and created America were Protestants, believing Protestants. 1.9% were Catholics, and then there was a couple of Jews. There are really two core doctrines of the Protestant Reformation. One is salvation by faith, because Christians understand that the source of all of our social problems is us, individuals, very important. We are flawed. That's why we have checks and balances in our government, because they understood that the people in government are just the same people causing the problems, except they have a lot more power, and so they're more dangerous. And the second doctrine was the priesthood of all believers. As Protestants, the Protestant Reformation was a revolt against the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was selling indulgences. If you want to get into heaven, you have to go through them. It's like, you have to go, whether you're going to heaven or hell, you have to go through Atlanta. But the church was the institution. And there were these governments that in Europe that favored one or established a religion. And then they persecuted the other religions. So the priesthood of all believers is a revolutionary doctrine. And it is why we have pluralism and why we have this notion of equality. It's each individual and their creator. And as I point out in the book, especially to my late friend Christopher Hitchens, who went on a very misguided war against God, this country could only have been created by Protestants. It could not be created by atheists like Christopher, because what makes this country is the idea that we are endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights. If there's no creator, if government gives the rights, they take them away. So this was a revelation for me that the doctrine of religious freedom in the First Amendment is the core of what it means to be American. And our global enemy, which is Islam, is conducting a campaign which Tony can tell you more about because he's on the Committee for International Religious Freedom. Their goal is to reinstitute the blasphemy laws that outlaw anything but Islam, which is what our forefathers, who were the Protestants, they were escaping in Europe, essentially, that their form of Christianity, whatever sect it was a form of blasphemy. But it's relentless. I mean, how many of you are familiar with the baker in Colorado? I mean, yeah, this is a man, he is under, this is just the kind of attack. Two, what I call vigilante gays, and the activist gays are different from Milo, from most gays, actually, who basically just want to be accepted. And they went after this baker because he was a Christian baker. And he's very famous. It's a Masterpiece Bake Shop. And he said, when they came in, they wanted him to make a cake for their gay marriage. And he said, I will make you any cake you want, but I can't. I could no more have a cake that symbolized gay marriage than I could one that was anti-American, because it's against my religious conscience. And they conducted a campaign to destroy his business. I mean, it cost them something like $170,000 in legal fees. The Supreme Court finally ruled that their attacks were discriminatory, but he's still under attack. They go in deliberately. They wanted him to make a cake to Satan. And this was backed 100% by the Obama administration, this assault on him. But this is just, I picked this because it seemed like a little modest thing. A guy has a bake shop. But it's a war, and that's the way they fight it.
Tony, did you want to add anything to that about the Protestant roots?
Yeah, I was going to jump in, but I didn't want you to take my mic, and then I'd have to take you to court and sue you. Actually, I want to add to David's point, because it's very significant, the last point about the baker, because that's a key part of the Protestant ethic. And Samuel Huntington, former Harvard professor, the late Harvard professor, wrote about that in terms of, for Protestants, they saw their work as an extension of their worship. In fact, in the New Testament, it says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do all unto the glory of God. And they came here to the United States not just for the freedom of worship, which is a term that the Obama administration used, and it's also a term that is used even by the more progressive Muslim countries, freedom of worship, much different than the freedom of religion. The freedom of religion is the ability to live your life according to your faith, whether it's in the marketplace, whether it's in the training of your children. It extends to every aspect of life. And that's where we see the great conflict right now over religious freedom is in the marketplace. The baker at Masterpiece Cake Shop, that's just one of many cases. In fact, there's a couple more cases pending before the Supreme Court in similar occupations. There's a bakery out of Oregon, which they've appealed to the Supreme Court to take their case as well. It is the ability to live and conduct your business according to your faith. Huntington and others have argued that is why America has been so successful, is that we didn't work for work alone, but we work for something greater than ourselves. And that's what makes our economy work. And it doesn't mean that everybody shares that viewpoint, but it is the foundation of America's ethic that is unique to this country. And that is really what's at stake. It spills over into our democratic process, our republic. It spills over into the marketplace, into our education system, into our home. All of that is at stake in this debate over religious freedom.
David, you'd mentioned a minute ago about freedom of conscience being, as you put it in the book, the cornerstone of American pluralism, and that it makes possible our diversity and our everyone's equality under the law, our ability to coexist. Well, diversity and coexistence, why would the left find any of that objectionable? What is driving the left's animus against religious?
Pelagian heresy. The reason the left hates Christians is because it hates America. And the left, it's an old heresy. Pelagius believed that sin was against human nature. That to commit a sin, you had to go against your nature. That basically people were, the phrase, good at heart. And therefore, Pelagius believed that, of course he was in a Catholic church, believed that if you were a devout Christian and just followed the morality, the path that Jesus laid out, then we could create heaven on earth. We would solve all human problems. And St. Augustine was the voice of the church. And the doctrine of the church was that sin is built into all of us. References to original sin. The sin of Adam and Eve, which is the sin of pride, which is their arrogance. You remember the serpent. It was a leftist. Tells them, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if you know evil, you shall be as God. And this is what drives, this is the left. The left is the Pelagian heresy. The left believes that people are good and some mystical entity called society is bad. But society is only a reflection of who we are. And so it's really a counter-crypto religion. And that's why it's really a fight to the death. And my book concludes with I had a discussion with Tony before. I didn't realize it was as difficult as it was, but that the salvation, as I see it, of our country at this moment was the election of Donald Trump, and evangelical Christians were responsible for that.
Did you add to that?
Well, we're not responsible for everything. Actually, Dave and I were talking about that earlier, and I get this question repeatedly. 2 years after the election, I still have reporters, trying to shame evangelicals for supporting Donald Trump. And my response is, well, what was the alternative?
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton? Give me a break. I mean, most of us were not with Donald Trump in the primary, but when it came down to the general election, we had a choice between Barack Obama on steroids and in high heels, or we had Donald Trump. Because Hillary Clinton was just going to accelerate the programs and policies of Barack Obama. And what I have said is that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are responsible for driving evangelicals into the arms of Donald Trump. Because for 8 years, he systematically attacked everything that we believed in and our ability to live according to our faith. And we are 2 years after the 2016 election, And I make no apologies for supporting Donald Trump and continuing to support him. I think he is the best thing that has happened to this country and has saved this republic.
There was one faith-based website.
It was a natural confrontation. Christians understand that we're all sinners. So there's a certain latitude in that, depending on the degree of your sins. And Obama is a Marxist traitor, and he's a believer in an earthly redemption carried out by politicians who have enough power that they can put you in gulags when you disagree with them. Obama comes from the same background that I did, but he never left.
There was one faith-based website, I can't remember which one it was, but they had described Obama as America's most biblically hostile president. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah. It went to incredible lengths. I mean, I forget the list that I put in there, but it's pretty...
Yeah, I mean, it was not indifference, which we're accustomed to from political figures. This was outright hostility. I mean, going after the little sisters of the poor.
Yeah.
I mean, a order of nuns who care for the least of these, forcing them, I mean, it's nonsensical just on its face, forcing them to provide for contraceptive in their health care plan.
Where they're only taking care of very elderly, poor people. But
They're nuns.
But they fought. I mean, it's a heroic story, the Little Sisters of the Poor.
And repeated, I mean, the Jack Phillips, the cake bakers, the florists, the coaches. I mean, the list goes on. And what's happened is Barack Obama opened a door of outright hostility. I'll give you just kind of an example. Prior to Barack Obama's election, and I've been at FRC for 15 years, and I do a lot of media, television. Anyone want to venture what network I was on the most prior to Barack Obama's election? No, I was actually hardly ever on Fox. I was on MSNBC more than any other network, followed by CNN, followed by Fox. I haven't been on MSNBC in 8 years because they don't want to have a conversation. Barack Obama, they came out of the closet as the opposition party to America and to conservatism with the election of Barack Obama. And we see that continuing with Donald Trump as president. The media is no longer objective reporters. They are the opposition party in America, and they are out front about that. And what he has done is basically waved the flag to every leftist group in America to attack. And at the center of that attack, the crosshairs are on orthodox religious expression. And now we see coming up actually before the Supreme Court agreed to take a case, which is a very significant case. They'll be hearing this term. It's the Bladensburg Cross case. Some of you may have heard of that. It's in Bladensburg, Maryland. It's called the Peace Cross. It's been there for 94 years. It's a World War I monument. It's a 40-foot tall cross. The significance of this case is if the lower court ruling prevails and this cross has to be taken down because it's on city property or county property, this would mean the crosses in Arlington and every other memorial would have to be eventually, because of the precedent-setting nature of this case, could be and most probably would be torn down. Now, what's behind this? Well, you know, we see the exclusion. We've seen this progression of the exclusion of religion from the public square. You may have seen a couple of weeks ago after the shooting in California in Thousand Oaks, where, again, people said, well, we're praying for the victims, which is a compassionate and a normal response. Doesn't stop there, but you pray. Well, the media outright mocking Christians for prayer, that's all designed to silence the religious voice in America. Monuments are a reminder. In fact, in the Old Testament, where you see these monuments that were erected after significant events, whether it was the crossing of the Jordan or other events, those were for subsequent generations so that they would look back and remember, what was this about? They're systematically seeking to tear those down because they've already eradicated the teaching of that in our schools. So now any reflection of our past and that Christian heritage that we have as a nation will also be removed. This is a very significant case. First Liberty Institute is the one handling the case, and arguments will probably be sometime this spring with a decision in the summer.
The wiping out of a religious presence began with the prayer and the schools decisions in the 60s. One of the things I did in my book is to look at the people who were responsible for driving prayer out of the schools. And the most significant figure was somebody, you might know the name, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was a lunatic. What you may not know is right before she launched this campaign to drive religion out of the schools, she went to Europe with her family to defect to the Soviet Union. This is in the middle of the Cold War. She referred to America as a gulag run by New York Jewish bankers. That's who Madalyn Murray O'Hair was. And I hate it when people call them liberals, because liberals, except for the man we're going to honor tonight, Alan Dershowitz, that's the only liberal. Liberals are vindictive bigots, is what they are. But I can't remember, it was 6 or by that time, 9. The vote was either 7-2 or 8-1 in her favor. The Supreme Court is the most dangerous branch of government. It's completely undemocratic. These are all appointees. None of them are elected. They have lifetime jobs. And what taking it to the Supreme Court does, it's such a weapon for the left. It means a tiny minority, like anybody who would think that Madalyn Murray O'Hair should be listened to, can change the fundamental law of the land. And then, of course, there's a series. The religious right. Religious people tended, until 1973, to stay out of politics. Religious right was created by the Roe v. Wade decision, which was another atrocity that the court put through. They invent rights that aren't in the Constitution, and they assert them. And then this, whatever it is, 7 or 8 people decide for a country of 200 or 300 million without going through legislative debate. We have courts. We have legislatures. We have state legislatures. There's all ways to adjudicate these issues and make compromises. This was the design of the founders. In my view, I'd be happy if the Supreme Court were just stripped of all its review power, period.
The left continually uses this phrase, wall of separation between church and state, to bludgeon religious freedom. Can you talk about that supposed wall? And
Tony, do it.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, it's a phrase taken from a private letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a group of Baptists, and Baptists are always discontent. I'm a Baptist. And they were concerned. They were a minority at the time. Actually, they happen to be the majority religion now in America in terms of the Protestant largest denomination. At the time, they were the smallest, and they were concerned that they were going to be forced to fund the competition down the street, and that the government would lean on them. And Thomas Jefferson said, no, there's a wall of separation between the state reaching into the business of the church. We've reversed that now, and where they use that to say that the church cannot reach into an influence state, and so it's often misapplied, but it is used almost as silly putty, and it's stretched to when pastors speak out that they're violating the separation of church and state, but they can't. They're not the state. But it deals more with the establishment clause, more accurately stated, of the government establishing a religion. And that's really what's at heart in this case I just mentioned, is a monument recognizing the sacrifice of veterans. Is that over-entanglement by the government in establishing a religion. I don't see how a monument, which for nearly 100 years has stood and no one's ever said a word about it, now all of a sudden it's a violation of the establishment clause of the Constitution. This goes back to the court that David was talking about. And if you look at every significant case that involves religion, these issues have not been dealt with by a legislative body. Whether it goes back to 1962 and 63, prayer and Bible in the school, whether it was abortion, whether it was the Ten Commandments coming out of the classrooms or coming out of the courtrooms, or the most recent decision on the redefinition of marriage. These are moral issues, spiritual issues that were not dealt with by the Congress or a legislative body. In fact, the opposite. The American people very clearly spoke out on the issue of marriage, but yet the court circumvented our process of how we arrive at consensus and mandated and imposed a verdict on the American people.
By one vote.
By one vote. And that's why, in part, it was a part of the 2016 election with that vacancy on the court. It brought this not forward, it brought it forward not as a theoretical issue, but a very practical and real issue. And it was a number one issue for evangelicals in their voting for Donald Trump and Mike Pence was the Supreme Court. And I believe we saw it from the left's perspective in the Kavanaugh hearings. I mean, I was there, unbelievable. In fact, when he was at the court being sworn in, they literally were clawing at the door of the Supreme Court. I mean,
These are dangerous, dangerous people.
it should show us what's at stake. They know what's at stake. It is their ability to impose their worldview on America. The court is the only way they can do that.
I think we've got time for to take maybe one or two questions. So this lady in the, yes, you, yeah.
What? And would you repeat that?
I'm wondering if you would, can you hear this? It doesn't feel alive.
Yes.
It's alive. I'm wondering if you believe that the Muslim God, Allah, is the same as the Christian God and plays the same role as the creator. That is, as we were just recognizing, the essence of this country.
Well,
That gives us these rights, and how you would feel, and whether you want to see Muslim symbols of their religion in all of the public places as well, 40 feet high, etc.
well, according to
What about Islam?
I can't, I don't presume to know who God is. I can't answer the first part of your question, but according to the Prophet Muhammad, the Muslim God wants to see all Jews exterminated in so many words, and has an attitude towards all other religions, which is imperialistic and wants to suppress them. And they've killed, in the name of Allah, 500,000 Christians and Yazidis in the last decade. So no, I don't think it's quite the same thing. When Islam undergoes a reformation and treats women as human beings, and when it renounces its imperialist designs on the rest of the world, yeah, then it would be the same thing.
Did you have a? I'm sorry, we're up against a really hard deadline here. Got about 30 seconds, maybe. Did you want to respond to that, Tony?
Well,
Have a final comment?
as a Christian, I do not believe that. I believe that, as Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. That is not the beliefs of the Islamic faith. Now I believe in religious freedom. And in America, I believe, see, as a Christian, I'm not afraid to stand and debate the tenets of the Christian faith with anyone else of any other faith. And that's what is unique about America, is that we can have people come to the forefront, but what has not allowed us to fully express our faith in this country is that there's been a handicap placed on Christians, whether it's been through court decisions or whether it's been through this political correctness imposed on our schools, where we feel like we have to give advantage to minority religions. I think they have every right to practice their faith in this country, and if they can win over a majority of Americans to believe the way they do, then...
That'd help us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I do not think that we should arbitrarily limit the freedoms of people just because of the faith that they have. I believe that America, even in the marketplace of ideas, it works for faith too, because I feel firmly in the Christian faith, as we have seen, that it produces the best results, that if we have the ability to proclaim that faith and debate the merits of that faith, we will prevail.
Thank you, Tony Perkins. Thank you, David Horowitz. Thank you, everybody.